Welcome to the Diversity Pivot Podcast. I'm your host, Julie Kratz. I am thrilled you are here with us today. Our purpose is to share stories, ideas, and tools to help you on your diversity, equity, and inclusion journey. Let's meet this week's guest. Welcome to the Diversity Pivot Podcast. So excited this week. We have another DEI expert. Beverly Jurenko is joining us. And Beverly's career has been multi-dimensional, as many DEI folks are. She served as the Director of Diversity Inclusion for Anadarko Petroleum Corporation and she worked in Europe, Latin America, Russia, in energy and finance for Amoco and Enron. Based in Buenos Aires, Beverly was a vice president of Bank Boston Capital, and she founded That's Math, an ed tech bilingual family math engagement company, and Best Cleaning Services, an award-winning cleaning company that specializes in green cleaning. In New York and London, she's also worked in investment banking and private placements for Prudential Bosch Securities and Prudential Investment Corporation, and is a certified in DEI at Cornell and is an alum of Yale and Harvard. Awesome, Beverly. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Julie. It is such a pleasure to be here.
Now, tell our listeners, if you could start off with your story, how did you find your way into the DEI world?
Yeah, well, I think my journey into the DEI world started very early because I feel like I was one of the people who just naturally notices when other people are left out. And I feel a true sense of compassion when I see other people are suffering. So I have this idea that just this natural inclination to want to include everybody and let's get together and let's rub elbows and let's do this project or create this thing. I just like to see everybody included. And I truly have seen instances where people expend energy to exclude other people, and I feel that it's very negative. It detracts from our potential. It diverts our energy and our resources from doing our best at whatever we are trying to do. And then it goes back to the harm that we're doing to other people. So I feel like this has always been part of who I am, even though I really didn't start my official journey in DEI until, I don't know, a number of years ago. But it's within me.
Yeah. I know it's like that radar is like someone doesn't feel included, or I'm noticing differences. Or I know for me, it was like I was always kind of a moth to the flame with people that were unique and different in social settings and wanting to learn more about them and how their life had been, and just that natural curiosity, I think, brings a lot of us into the DEI space.
Yeah,
Beverly,
and
yeah, please.
sorry, and I think when you're living abroad, as I have done a couple of times, as you mentioned in my background, you learn what it's like to be the only one in the room who doesn't speak the language, who didn't grow up with the people around you, who doesn't share the life experience that the other people have. And
Mm-hmm.
although that's not the same life experience as some groups of people that we have in the U.S., specifically the Black experience, it at least opens up your heart more to the compassion because you yourself have the feeling firsthand of being left out and being different and never being able to fit in.
Yeah. 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 And I think that empathy bridge, right? I might have had a very different lived experience, and some experiences, like you mentioned, Black Americans have a very unique experience from immigrants and folks that have traveled overseas and lived in different places. So it's not that we want to say my experience is the same as yours, but there might be some nuances and similarities, and there might be a shared experience around feeling othered or different. So definitely appreciate that perspective, Beverly. And I think that lens is so important to bring to the DEI space. My lived experience, my unique history, my unique background, and a welcomeness for others to do the same. Because you and I both know, doing this work all the time, that it's very rare that people feel a sense of belonging in their workplaces. It's very rare that they feel fully seen, fully heard, feel like they're a part of the organization. A lot of times we feel that othering or difference through microaggressions and other, acts of non-inclusion, although usually unintentional. I wonder, what do you see as opportunities in the workplace for folks that want to be more inclusive? What would be some recommendations to have healthier, more inclusive workplace cultures?
Well, I think that's a great question. And I think we have to, one thing that might help is if we acknowledge that we start by looking and listening with our audio and visual filters in place. We're trained to be influenced a lot by what we see. We know that our brain processes the visual cues very quickly. And we are also sensitized to respond sharply to words and phrases that touch on our past and specifically on our fears and on our experiences that may have pain or trauma in them. So I think that when we start from that place and slow down so we can recognize that our brain is taking us automatically to a place that has allowed us to survive in the past, and recognize that this situation might be different. Maybe we should try looking at things from another filter. Perhaps our response is tied more to our past experience than to the situation at hand. And I honestly think we serve ourselves better when we attempt to take ourselves out of the equation and see the other people around us as distinct, separate individuals that are probably trying to communicate something or convey something important to them, and that they too are on their own journey of learning. And according to them, what they're saying is making sense. So if you start to view things from the standpoint of putting a positive filter on it, then you can find the commonalities and break down the areas where you're not seeing things in the same way, and start building on what you agree on and what you want to build together, rather than falling into the habit that we all experience of having a very quick response to a visual or verbal cue.
Yeah. Yeah, we're hardwired to react versus respond. And I find that pause is so important in diversity work, that we pause, like you said, kind of take myself out of the equation and think about just for a minute, just the perspective of the other person, because often we're filling in blanks, making assumptions, giving advice rather than just listening and giving space for others to bring their best self, their full self, whatever self they need to bring to the conversation. How that sounds interesting in theory, and I find this a lot in the DEA space, is that we have these theories, academic philosophies and research, because so much of DEI was born out of academia. How do we put these practices into place? If somebody said, I want to take myself out of that equation and really focus on the other person and create that space, what might you recommend at an individual level? And Beverly, too, I'm curious at an organizational level, because I think a lot of times we rely on individuals to lead culture changes, which you and I know, yeah, that can happen, but it's probably better if we focus on the organization as a whole as well.
Sure. Well, I think that as an organization, what DEI leaders can do is nurture a culture of learning by talking and processing. Um, if talking in diverse groups becomes risky, our tendency is to be silent. And then we lose the voices of people who are trying to understand and trying to connect the dots in terms of what they may have been conditioned to believe or had thought in the past or had jumped to based on stereotypes. I think inspiring a culture where it's safe for people to share what their experience is and what their questions are without being judged can do a lot to open up a conversation and change a company culture of one where people are not truly being themselves as they approach this work because they're asked to, they're forced to, it's part of what they're supposed to do in their company. Um, I think that when they're given the space to talk safely about what their experience is, we can make a lot more progress.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, when people feel that psychological safety, which again, just like belonging, these concepts are fleeting, they're rare. A lot of times we're conditioned to get the work done. And what is the work? It's the production, the sales, the projects, the widgets, it's the things, it's not the behavior. And when we focus on the right inclusive behaviors and reward those behaviors, that's when we start to see real change. I wonder if you had I know DEI is really in an interesting time right now. I'm seeing a lot of, uncertainty about the future. I'm seeing a lot of, budgets being retracted, maybe signaling a deprioritization of DEI. From your vantage point, what trends are you seeing and what might you recommend to leaders, DEI leaders, HR leaders in the space that, really want to continue the momentum, but might feel some headwinds right now?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And it is disturbing that the budget for DEI is not being supported many places and that the commitments that were made, 50 to 60 billion dollars collectively on the part of US corporations that were made after George Floyd, are not being followed through on. I think I've seen only 7 to 8 billion dollars of actual spending that's occurred. Um, and we seem to have put this aside for some reason. Um, I think that the people within the corporations who believe this is important can support the DEI efforts and the DEI offices by mentioning the value that the DEI programs have provided to them so that their management knows that this is something that is important and that has influenced their careers and their decision to stay with the company. We tend not to mention DEI unless we are asked about it a lot of times, especially as an individual contributor. But if in conversation you can simply let people know that this has made an impact to you, it tells your management that this is something that is demonstrating success in terms of recruiting and retaining and developing talent, which we know has been a, um, a difficulty in the past 3 years. And I also know that DEI officers have a very uh, challenging time instilling unconditional, longer term, unwavering support from top management. There is a bit of an idea that if you haven't been able to affect transformation in 6 months, then the DEI program, well, it didn't really do that much. It just caused a couple of complaints. In my opinion, you need 18 to 24 months before you can start seeing change from a DEI program. So communicating to our CEOs and our boards that this support for a longer period of time through an initial learning period and a change period is truly necessary to bring a cultural change within an organization is really important.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I love that time period. Yeah, at least 18 months, 2 years, which it's interesting that people expect this like massive shift from, and we do workshops and training series over the course of 6 months. They're like, well, what changed? And it's like, well, it's a good question. What did you want to change? What outcomes were you looking for? Did you set those as objectives and KPIs and measure them? And it's like, well, no. So if we don't know what the intended outcome is, it's really hard to vet the success of it. And I think you're right, Beverly. 3 years ago, a lot of good intention, but very unaware folks and business leaders stepped into this conversation thinking, oh yeah, let's do this. It's the right thing to do. Everyone's riled up about it. And then they quickly realized, oh, this is much more in depth. It's a much longer term effort. And what I suspect is happening, the fallout of that is one, we're kind of set up corporate spaces for short-term quarterly business results and stock returns. That's kind of the metric that's used, which DEI didn't work that way. And then the other one, like you said, the naysayers. Most folks are supportive of DEI, not just for their employers, but businesses they want to work with and reward with spending. Most studies show 75% or more, and younger people are even higher than that. So there's not that many naysayers, I don't think. But those one or two loud voices, they have created a dissent amongst organizations where it's like, oh, that was too much. We had complaints, even if it's just one or two of hundreds of people. And I don't know. I don't know how to challenge that. Beverly, do you have ideas about the loud few that seem to stir the
I
pot?
do. Yeah. And I've been advocating for this for a while now. I truly believe you get what you measure. And I think that corporations would do very well to put, starting with one DEI metric as a KPI in everyone's performance review and have it tied in a minor way to variable compensation to start off with. Because if we put something in there, like you can put various ways that managers can demonstrate that they're practicing inclusive management techniques, for example. You can measure how people are interviewing and developing talent. It can be a combination of subjective and objective things, but if you put something from the board level all the way down to every individual contributor, you're going to get people thinking about it. And people like to get all the good check boxes on their performance reviews. So start with something modest that you can measure, that people will be happy to check off, and then they get a little bit of money for it. And that will change that'll be a little rudder in the big ocean of our culture to change people's behavior and have that reinforced by something tangible. The other thing that I think really helps is when your DEI office is distinct from human resources. I think human resources plays a vital role within companies and does so much to serve us. But human resources and DEI have different objectives, and part of being successful in transforming culture and as your DEI office is gaining the trust of employees. And I think it's very difficult to do that when you're part of HR.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that I understand why we put nested DEI and HR in the past. But at this point, if a leader of diversity, equity, and inclusion is not sitting at the leadership team level and not having a strong voice in those conversations, the efforts are generally very futile. So agreed. And HR, just because you've done HR for 20 years does not mean you're capable of doing DEI. I have so many HR leaders that find themselves conflicted and tasked to do this, and they're not equipped to do so. So let's resource this as we would any important business initiative. And DEI shouldn't be an initiative, right? It's an overall cultural change, like you said. But
it's a strategy. Yes, it's definitely
right.
a strategy, not an initiative.
Right. Yes. So DEI is a strategy, not as an initiative. I'm hearing you say managing KPIs, and performance reviews, just like we would anything else that's important. Inclusive behavior is absolutely measurable. There's 360 tools, there's just regular feedback gathering. There's some great assessments we use with leaders too to really garner a picture of their organization and the perceptions of inclusion. Because once you can measure that and then come up with an action plan to map to those key activities, and you can remeasure it and see if it improved. And so, yes, this is a long-term effort, but one that you're certainly likely to see a powerful ROI on when it's done well. When it's not done well, though, like we've been discussing, Beverly, you don't really get those results. So, could you tell us, doing the work you've done inside organizations and consulting with organizations, what are some do's and don'ts? What are some watch outs you might recommend to folks that are like, hey, we've been doing this DI stuff, but it's not really working? Like, why wouldn't it work? And what helps make it work at organizations?
Hmm. Well, if you are thinking about your DEI strategy as kind of a jack in the box, like when you need it, you push the button, bring out the people, have an event, take some pictures, and then put it back and forget it. Um, it's going to be hard for your DE office to be effective. So I think it's critical to empower the head of your DEI efforts, strategy, so that they have the cred with your senior operational managers to have direct conversations about how your DEI involvement can help the company or how there is resistance to moving the strategy forward. I also feel many DEI heads are not given access to, you mentioned data and measurement. I was really fortunate in my prior role to have access to all the data I wanted within the company. And when you get granular and look at the data over time and the demographics of who comes into groups, who stays in groups, how do their performance ratings change over time, who gets promoted, who are the people in different groups that you see getting promoted or leaving, you can see who the inclusive managers are and where they're not. It's very clear. And then when the DEI head can go to these managers and say, look, here's what you've done. Congratulations. You're really doing a fantastic job. I'd like to bring you to speak to other managers in the company because you're doing a great job. It's really easy to do that. And when you see people that are struggling to recruit, retain, develop, promote diversity, then you see where there's more work to do in terms of building an inclusive mindset.
Absolutely. That's accountability, right? It's not just your behavior, but it's outcomes over time. And so I'm hearing these stories come up in little pockets with my clients of, hey, your team is kind of all very similar right now. Your next hire, your next promotion, your next team member, we really need to think intentionally about how to diversify the group. And that's just not race and gender, right? It's diversity of background, of somebody from a different industry, age, etc. And holding folks accountable for that. Because if you can't make a diverse team work as a leader, then you're probably not going to be very successful in general as a leader. And so this is kind of a non-negotiable as we develop leaders of the future to really think about how do they cultivate an inclusive culture where folks from diverse backgrounds want to work and feel safe, bringing their full values and who they are. Yeah, awesome thoughts, Beverly. I wonder, as we wrap up and think about the message we want to leave our listeners with today, if you could pick one thing, one thing that you want DEI, leaders to do more of, or folks inside organizations that are driving DEI, what would you hope for the future? What would you hope people could do more of?
Oh, that is such a great question because I have this idea that we need more sugar. And, sugar is thought of being a bad thing to consume, but as an organization, maybe it's good. And here's what sugar stands for in my construct: see other people for who they are, see their intentions, their good intentions, that they're trying to make a difference. Don't filter them through our past experiences and assumptions and conclusions, which may not apply. See other people, not through our own filter, but as they really are. And the H is for hug more. Now, we don't want to hug people in the office who don't want to be hugged. I always think you should ask permission before you hug somebody else, but we can hug emotionally. We can embrace what they're trying to share, what they're trying to do. And as they're learning, as they're exploring, as they're learning by talking, we can emotionally hug them so they feel safe. And then grow. That's the last part of my sugar, because after you're seen for who you are and you're hugged and embraced, then you're free to be yourself and grow. So we need more sugar.
Yes, we do. That's lovely. I mean, seeing people for who they are, and welcoming that. And rather than thinking about divergent thinking as negative, yeah, it might be, challenging in the short term, but wow, what a power in innovation and more robust decision making and more powerful business results when we embrace and meet people where they're at. So thank you, Beverly, for sharing your thoughts, your ideas, your strategies with us today. Tell our listeners, how can they follow you and stay in touch with you?
Oh, thank you. So the name of my company is Inside Edge Consulting, LLC. In addition to D&I work, I am a leadership and career coach. My ideal client is talented, ambitious, and inclusive, willing to commit to the coaching process and determined to make an impact. So you can find me on my website at www.inside-edge-com. Inside-edge-group.com. I'm also on LinkedIn as Beverly Jurenko, Beverly-Jurenko, or you can find me on Instagram at beverly.insideedge. That's all one word. And I would love to hear from anybody who's interested in talking about coaching or DEI.
Awesome. Awesome. Yes. What's next for DEI? I think we've come up with some really interesting ideas today, Beverly, some tangible things that people can take action on and get their sugar. And I appreciate your voice in this world.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you for everything that you do. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you liked what you heard, consider hiring Julie and the Next Pivot Point team to come speak at your organization's next event. We speak on a range of topics from active allyship to inclusive leadership to how to create a culture where everyone feels seen, heard, and feels a sense of belonging. Thank you for being on this journey with us. Go to nextpivotpoint.com to learn more.